Hello, folks. And as we dive into the top of the hour here, folks, we're going to have some little quick housekeeping items here. If you have something to say and you want to kind of just throw some chat and whatnot, put in the chat window. If you have a question, please put that into the Q&A. We have our folks standing by. Myself, I'll chime in once in a while, and I've got now my counterpart, Abhishek, who's on the line as well. He's going to be kind of monitoring the chat window as well, and he'll probably interject some questions if we don't see them right away. So please use that. And then I'm going to pass it off to Tawny because she's got a really cool guest today. And that guest is none other than Tawny. Take it away.
Jerry Martin. I'm really excited. If you do not know Jerry, you need to know Jerry, 21-year veteran in the wireless space. And that's 21 years, I believe, in Gov, right?
Public sector, that's correct.
Public sector, yeah. So Jerry, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. A big fan of the podcast and of the webinar series, and happy to be here and hope I can help share some information. So I'm Jerry Martin. I go by DWiFi guy on the Twitters. And like Tawny said, I've been in public sector for coming up on 21 years now in October. Most of that with the same company through some acquisitions. So I work for Insight Public Sector. We're based in the DC metro area, actually right across the toll road from Ekahau's Reston office. So close neighbor there. Yeah. And yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. You know, we talked a lot about internally at Ekahau, the things that we wanted to talk, discuss, topics we wanted to highlight on the webinars. And public sector government is always one that comes up that is very popular. And so Jerry, of course, you have so much knowledge to share. So let's talk about that. Why is government, I mean, I think that's one of the things that people always say, man, it's just so difficult. So Jerry, why is government, the public sector, so challenging?
Yeah, so I run into that a lot with my commercial counterparts. They just don't understand how we do business in the government, and they kind of look at me cross-eyed sometimes and think I'm crazy for having done it for so long. But at the end of the day, technology is technology, whether that's hardware, route switch, or Wi-Fi. At the end of the day, the technology is the same. We're implementing the same hardware that our counterparts in commercial space are doing it. It's just the way we get it done, right? So the government procurement process is very different. So on the commercial side, it's all about building relationships with the customers, getting in that trusted advisor role, and we do that on public sector as well. Mm-hmm. But then in commercial, you take the customer out to dinner, you wine and dine them, maybe take them out to play mm-hmm. golf. Those are the things that get us put in jail in public sector, right? You just can't do that, right? So, we're bound by the FARs, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and you guys are going to keep me honest when I start throwing out acronyms, right? Because we tend to do that in public sector. So doesn't
Gov have, they have acronyms for the acronyms?
Yeah. So especially when we're talking about the TLAs, right? The three-letter agencies. Yeah.
Acronyms for the acronyms. Yeah.
That's how crazy it can get. So
that's another secret acronym for that. Okay.
TLA. Yeah. I got to be careful how much I share. So yeah.
We would tell you, but the rest.
Keep you honest.
Exactly. Thank you. So we're bound by the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and basically that makes sure that favoritism isn't done in government procurement, that the government gets the best price for what they're trying to accomplish. And so a lot of times if an agency wants to procure, network equipment, wireless and whatnot, they have to do it on a contract vehicle. So these are pre-competed government vehicles, and it's the way the government can do business. Some agencies are bound by those contract vehicles. They must purchase everything because they've already pre-competed pricing with a set number of vendors, and generally it can be anywhere they'll award that contract to anywhere from like 3 to several hundred mm-hmm. VARs in the industry. So we're bound by those things, and then there's the other regulations about how they implement it, and other things that we're going to get into, like policies and governance, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, the Department of Defense implements networking a lot different from our commercial agencies, and the commercial agent or the civilian agencies. They want to try to follow those processes and procedures sometimes, but it depends on how and what they're trying to accomplish. So, for instance, in Department of Defense, there's a document that's DoD Instruction 8420.01. Yeah, it's about as exciting as it sounds. That kind of outlines the how you go about implementing wireless on a government Department of Defense network, right?
Mhm.
So, and unlike in our industry on the commercial side, we have best practices documents. These are things that absolutely have to be followed to the T in order to get an ATO, which is an authorization to operate,
Mhm.
to put wireless on a government network. And then, you know, we can drill down forever. Is it carrying classified information or not? So there's a bunch of different ways that things go on with that.
Jerry, one of the things I was going to ask you, so when we say public sector and gov, we're not just specifically talking about federal government. We're not talking about federal government agencies. There's a lot of different industries and different organizations that encompass and fall under public sector.
Absolutely. So like in Department of Defense, we have colleges, right? There's colleges within the Department of Defense, the different they have medical, there's hospital systems within the government. So yeah, there's different things that we see in the commercial sector that exist under the federal space.
So not only, so that's another challenge. So not only do you have to deal with the government red tape and the policies and the challenges from that perspective and complying, but you are dealing with every kind of industry.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So library systems, hospital systems, warehousing for parts and pieces for, you know, yeah, it cuts across the board. And that's why I say, doing the actual Wi-Fi job is very similar to what we see everywhere else. It's just how we get there. How do we get to that final install process, right?
So you would say it's almost like operating in almost interacting, it's operating as a country within a country almost, like, or an organization within an organization.
Yeah, you could say that, absolutely, because even
like a within a city within a city,
yeah,
a little city within a city, yeah,
yep. Even within a single organization, they'll have their OIT, which is Office of Information Technology, and then they'll have a different security subdivision. There's the facilities guys that are sometimes running the guest Wi-Fi. Yeah, so it's pretty fractured in some senses.
So you're telling me that not all Wi-Fi is run by Wi-Fi people? Is that what you're trying to tell me, Jerry?
Yeah, and that is the actual truth. Truth on the ground.
Before we get started, before we move on, I have a poll question for everybody. So let's think about that. Insert Jeopardy music here. Play it in your head. Think about the Jeopardy music.
I wasn't cued.
Come on, Stu. Stay on your toes. Stay on your toes.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Now I don't even know the tune.
No, you got it. That's it.
Dun, 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 dun.
All right.
Dun, boom, boom. There we go.
All right. Well, I'm going to share. So this is interesting, especially because of the conversation that we've been having. Above and beyond, by far, government policies and procedures.
Wow.
Yeah, that I would agree.
In looking at this, I think that the way the audience picked it is about what I would have done too, in that order.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Interesting. That is interesting. Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty good. This audience is on it.
All
right. So Jerry, let's keep talking about that. So talk to us about department level controls and some of those parameters.
Yeah, so because of how large the government is, and even across some specific agencies, like we were saying, there are some instances where OIT, the Office of Information Technology, is managing the network, but guest network is done by facilities, and it's because guest network is not open in the sense of like just free range, you do whatever you want, but basically it's not running government network. They're not carrying government information. They're providing, guest Wi-Fi for visitors, for instance, like in a museum, right? If you go to one of the museums in DC, you walk in and you can get guest Wi-Fi. That's not on the government network. They'll generally keep those air gapped. So, and in a lot of cases, you're having to put in a wireless network that has to contend with an existing government network, right? So you have channel mapping issues and power requirements and security of the devices and everything. So it's not like you can go to a specific agency, talk to one person and say, okay, let's deploy wireless across all your campuses, and it'll all be exactly the same. in the healthcare part of government, they actually break it down by regions, and every region, could be doing a completely different thing. So it gets complicated sometimes.
That's helpful.
Yeah. So, it's odd that they do it that way, but I guess, certain regions have ways they do things that are different. I would, I don't know if I can really explain that one, to be honest.
Brian says, Gary, that you just read his mind. So.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So with all of that going on, folks, we're going to talk about some use cases, and we're going to go into some of the design pieces as well in designing. But this government side of it is really challenging to understand. And we have a lot of folks who have asked, how do I get into public sector? And I don't even know what to do. So let's talk about, where do you start? So Jerry.
Yeah. So going back to if you're trying to get into government business, and do business with the government, that's a whole other webinar we can probably do about how you need to win, get on contract vehicles, GSA schedule, some of the larger contract vehicles like SOUP and whatnot. But the quickest path is, especially for smaller companies, the government has a lot of set aside work for small businesses to help encourage, small business, the economic growth of them. In the Department of Defense, they have set asides for SDVOSBs, which is service disabled veteran owned small businesses. So if you are a service disabled person and you're starting up an IT company, there's some advantages for you working that way. And so there are certain set aside, things that are set aside for those. We, as a larger company, sometimes don't have access to those opportunities. So we partner with them, right? We'll partner with, and there's a whole other set of rules and restrictions, like how much of the work we can do versus what they have to do, and whatnot. But it's that's the way to get into it, right? And then when you're talking about, the types of data the network carrying, like actual doing the work, right? So again, going into, the only time you're going to find classified information is generally on a DoD network, Department of Defense, and going back to that 8420 document, and that's publicly available, by the way. Quick Google search for anything I say. Nothing I'm telling you here is classified or secret. Quick Google searches can check me on a lot of this stuff. Yeah. Quick Google searches will check me on a lot of stuff, but those documents kind of give you the starting points, and then they'll branch off and say referencing this document, and whatnot. So figuring that out, and then so that's a lot of it. Figuring out what kind of data you're carrying. Is it guest network? And then generally that's a completely separate thing. And when I say guest network on a government, for the government agency, it's not, coffee shop type guest where you can just walk in, connect, and everything's fine, right? Most agencies, they have what you would consider sponsored guest access. So if you're a contractor working on site, or you have a reason to be in the building, a legitimate reason to get on wireless to, share a presentation or whatnot, those networks are very different. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about some specific examples of that later, right?
Yeah, we will. Yep, absolutely.
All right.
And then there's some of the more intricate stuff, like FIPS is the Federal Information Protection. Oh goodness, Federal Information Processing Standards. Right.
Okay.
And then FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act. And then we have FedRAMP, which is the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, I believe is what that one stands for. These are all agencies and organizations that the government looks for to verify that the networks are secure. It's everything. When you're talking government networking, everything is about the security, right? So FIPS is talking about the encryption standards that are used on networks. It covers that. FISMA is just more generalized, like how we're protecting the data. And FedRAMP is more on the cloud side, right? So, in wireless, we have a lot of our OEMs that build cloud-based management portals in certain environments in the government. Unless you're FedRAMPed and you go through a whole certification process that's done by third party to validate that your cloud platform is secure, we're not implementing those in a lot of those networks because of that, right? For lack of it. Now, a lot of the major OEMs are already in process to do it, but I've heard from them, some of them have been at it for 2 years or more, and it's just an arduous process for them.
I'm curious, have you seen an increase? I mean, you're talking about encryption and security and air gap networks. Have you seen an increase in adoption of like WPA3 and a request and understanding of what the security for the network is going to be?
Yeah, the agencies that we talk to, their OIT, the folks in the OIT offices are up on things that are going on in the industry. They understand the changes that are coming up. We've had a few that are talking to us about, AX and what 6 gigahertz is going to do for them. It's because of the government procurement cycle, though, sometimes things take a lot longer than others. The processes do. So, and then we really talk to them about need. Like, if it's a government guest network, do they really need AX and 6 gigahertz in the future? Based on their buying cycles and whatnot. So we have those same conversations that we do on the commercial side. Most larger corporations.
Gotcha. All right, so talk to us about on-premise controller versus a cloud.
So
I love this. I love the smile, Jerry.
Yeah. So cloud, going back to FedRAMP, I put that there because most of what we see when we deploy networks in the government that are carrying government information, again, not the guest access stuff in some of the hospitals and other campuses, it's pretty much controller based because of the fact that there's not a FedRAMP cloud-based management platform yet. So we're doing mostly controller based, and in some of the smaller pockets, maybe it's just like autonomous APs, running in a couple, 2 or 3 in a remote building somewhere or something. So.
Gotcha. So someone I was asking a question, is it common to have multiple Wi-Fi platforms in the same building?
Yes, unfortunately, yes. Again, it depends. Now I want to generalize a little bit. He or she said in a building. So in a single building, you can have multiple agencies. In a single building, you can have a single agency with multiple departments that are managing their own stuff. So yeah, it's again much like a corporate office complex where you have to contend with RF interference and channel planning and all that stuff, right? And then proximity, especially like a military basis, proximity to radar systems, right? So yeah, all those things are in play.
So tell us about that. How does that impact, because how are you dealing with the interferences when you run into that with radar and things like that? Because there's a lot of those frequencies that are critical to what they're working on. Some of it is top secret, some, different security clearances needed,
right?
Versus just a general Wi-Fi frequency needed.
Yeah, so we do the same things as other folks in commercial do. We'll go out and do a pre-assessment survey. We'll take a Sidekick and some software and go out there and take a look at the RF environment and just do our best to try to figure out what the channel planning and power settings are going to be. Some of the difficulties we've run into, like standing up a separate guest Wi-Fi network where there's an existing government network, is that their government network may be set to ARM or some other autonomous channel mapping system, and generally our RFPs, the request for proposals, will clearly state that we're going to be setting up in a place where Wi-Fi exists already, and we have the limitations of not interfering with the government's network, with the other part of the network, right? So it's a challenge. It really is, and it tends to be, in some cases more APs with channels channel power turned down. It's a design challenge for sure, and Ekahau helps us with that tremendously, obviously.
Awesome. So let's talk a little about, so we understand some of the challenges through the red tape. So let's talk about the actual deployments on site. So you said you do pre-deployment surveys. So what does that look like as you're going through gathering requirements?
Yeah, so it's actually funny because sometimes if an RFP comes out, if we're not working with the customer ahead of time, we're given a list of requirements. We have to put wireless in this particular location. Sometimes they'll only give us square footage. Sometimes they'll give us the floor plans, but they're hashed PDF documents that are pretty rough, as you guys have probably seen before. So we run into some of those challenges. We really like to be able to get out on site and walk the facility and put eyes on the building, because a lot of cases we've been given floor plans, and I've gone out and done a pre-assessment walkthrough, or they call them pre-award walkthrough, and we're looking at this floor plan. Is like, where did that wall come from? And what's it on this diagram? Oh, well, this building was built in 1932, and we've upgraded it and built onto it, and so those are some pretty interesting challenges that we run into for that. And then you have some of the other things like, historical preservation, in downtown DC that we find that a lot, but even out in remote locations, they'll have to deal with historical preservation rules where they've got to hide the APs. You can't drill through certain walls and that stuff. So there are quite a bit of challenges. Hospital environments. I was at one late last year where we were doing the site walkthrough, and as we're walking down the hallway, I look up on the ceiling tiles and I see this little sticker with a letter A on it, and that's asbestos. That's not a good thing. So
seriously, wow.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah. So we have to take those things into account too, because that means you can't push a tile up and see and make sure that there's not a firewall. You have to drill through. You have to have containment procedures in place. Hospitals, very much like commercial side. Stu and I had a chat about that a little bit. And anti-ligature stuff for certain wings of the hospital.
Shh, don't give it away. We're going to talk about that later.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. So. And then in a Department of Defense area, right, where you have a SCIF, which is a secured or sensitive compartmented information facility, that's where they keep all the secrets. I don't get to go there, right? But proximity to SCIFs, if we're putting Wi-Fi in a building that has a SCIF inside of it, you have to stay, a meter away from any perimeter of the building, and you have to have your radios turned down to lowest power possible.
Really?
There's all kinds of rules surrounding that stuff. So that, that changes your design plan. You can't just, pull it back Ekahau, throw a bunch of APs out there, do auto populate, right? So there's a lot of design challenges around that.
Someone was asking a question. Are there any restrictions regarding utilizing DFS channels, or do you have to use non-DFS channels only?
No, we can use DFS channels. Again, just taking into the same consideration about non-interference and stuff. When you get into the military networks, sometimes we had a situation where I was doing a pre-site walkthrough, and I'm carrying around my laptop with the RF spec N on it, and we're walking down a hallway and everything's fine, and then all of a sudden it just it goes crazy. And it's like, what's going on in that room right there?
You're like, I want to know.
Exactly. Well, they said, well, we can't know. It was so basically it was actually a training room where a bunch of service members were testing out all kinds of electronic gear, and they were just completely blowing the spectrum out of the water. So we have those challenges to deal with. But yeah, as far as RF, the rules and regulations that everybody else applies, the government's the same way. They actually want to keep it within the same realm of what the commercial standards are, right?
Awesome. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty use cases of this, right? Folks, Jerry has so kindly going to share with us some use cases that he actually can talk about, because there's a lot of, especially with government, that you cannot share, you cannot divulge. So let's talk about some of those. I think some of these buildings might be recognizable, but let's start with this one. This is actually one of my favorites, the Air Force Academy. Or as Stu calls it, the Avengers New Training Facility.
Tony Stark is in there somewhere. He's there. I can see it.
You just can't see him.
Well, but just look. You can see the A is right there in that wing. See it? Avengers. Yes.
Well, it's funny. We talked about the diversity of the type of deployments in the public sector, higher ed institutions. So you've got the Naval Academy, you have West Point, you have all of those that fall under Gov. And so you're dealing, as you were talking about healthcare and warehousing, you also are dealing with higher ed.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, these are basically, campuses, institutes of higher learning, right? And they have the same issue that most colleges do, where, in order to retain or to attract, this younger generation who's digital born, right? My son, I don't think that understands a life without a tablet or a phone, right? And it's actually scary. There was a survey done recently where it said to I forget which generation it was, but like Wi-Fi access is more important than personal hygiene, right? So it's important for these institutions to be able to have things that these people expect to have in their normal civilian life. So and then at a lot of these campuses, they have college football programs. Like the Air Force Academy is involved in the college football program, so they've got Wi-Fi in their stadium. They have a huge campus full of other sports programs that need to have, you know, wireless for the coaches, for the staff, you know, for visitors when they come to watch the programs. That's not just in the main football stadium, right? So it's much like the, you know, the rest of higher ed, you know, in college campus stuff. And this particular location has a lot of historical preservation issues to deal with, as far as like older buildings and not changing the material look of them and you know, whatnot. So it was interesting.
Before we go on to the next one, I missed my cue for me. Our poll question number 2. So we were talking about interferences and some of that. So folks, let's see how they respond.
That's a good question.
You guys should all see that poll question now.
Yeah.
And this is where I didn't cue the music again.
Jeopardy.
Dun,
Jeopardy.
dun, dun.
Sing it for us, Stu, solo. We'll be quiet.
Dun, 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 dun. I was more trying to cue up the Avengers theme, but you know, because I'm just, you know, mesmerized by it.
All right. So this is, you know, it's interesting. Spectrum analysis is something that I think is quite interesting. How do you know? Like, how there are folks that can look at the results of a SpecAn or a live SpecAn and say, oh, that's exactly what this is at any given time. But it, you know, that's something, maybe Stu, I'm thinking that we need a spectrum analyzer specifically dedicated webinar. What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that.
So.
All right.
For sure.
Yeah.
So TC Slattery was talking about one of the buildings. They're constructed of granite and very unfriendly to Wi-Fi. I have a similar story where we actually went out to an Air Force base that needed to add Wi-Fi to some what they called new office space. And when we went out there, it turns out they took a munitions bunker and converted it into some office space. And if you know anything about the military, munitions bunkers generally a place where you hide munitions, where if they were to go boom, they're not going to do too much to the surrounding area. So that was a pretty challenging one.
So how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so
I'm putting you on the spot, Jerry.
No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. So it all depends on the internal layout of the building. In our case, we happened to get very lucky where it was much, you know, pretty much an open space where they did put up dividers. It was like office cubicle type dividers, so it wasn't as challenging as we anticipated it to be. But again, just the point where if you know you think something is easy, new office space, and you read an RFP or RFQ for something like that, if you don't dive into it and get that on-site pre-solicitation visit, and you can run into some serious issues with RF, and that is for sure, especially in a lot of the older buildings.
So
yeah,
oh, go ahead, Stu.
Yeah, sorry. I you know, that's actually really interesting. You say that because there's a lot of you know, not talking just about military or maybe even designing a wireless for an underground abandoned missile facility.
Yeah,
but that we may or may not know some people that actually do that. But even actually, you look at where I live out in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. There's a lot of buildings that are limestone and granite on the outer facade, and sometimes in the like the walls themselves.
Yeah,
and so that makes it really difficult for those older structures, those historical structures, to design Wi-Fi, especially for the older post office buildings and government buildings. Yeah, I mean, the way you're explaining it there, Jerry, it really kind of hits home. It's a lot of the complexities that we learn, you know, in our experience for our course, through our ECSE courses, but also just the experience that you've gained of just seeing these cities within cities, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it brings home the point when you take your ECSE training where, you know, take measurements, right? Go out to the site and take a measurement through a wall, because you may see drywall, but you don't see the lead lining behind it, because it used to be, you know, a dental office, right? And they were doing x-rays in there, or even in a munitions facility, they're doing x-rays on the metal to make sure that this missile is not cracked after sitting, you know, out in the sun for X number of years or whatever. So yeah, there's all kinds of interesting things you can run to, and it really brings home the point that you've got to get out there and do some RF spectrum analysis and take some measurements before you jump into something. And, you know, in government work, anybody that's done this before knows that once you commit to something and you turn in that RFP and say, I can do this for X number of dollars with X number of APs, and then you get on site and find out, oh no, it's going to take twice as many, that doesn't fly. You're pretty much obligated to deliver the solution, right? Yeah. And I mean, there are some extenuating circumstances. There's language in the FARs that, you know, if we weren't giving the right information, we can go back and request, you know, a modification to the contract or whatever. But it's important to get it right the first time, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Exactly. And Tawny, if you'll allow me on this part here, is that when we talk about the design aspect of it, is putting like Jerry, you've gone out and you've tested it, take the sidekick, tested the wall attenuation, understand it. Then that's the time that you go back into the planning tool, which is Pro, and say, okay, give Pro the most information possible. That, yes.
Junk in, junk out.
Yes, that's exactly what it is, right?
That's exactly right.
So it's just trying to figure out, yes, we can model a marble wall or a steel wall, but maybe we don't know what else is in there, right? Yeah. So we can customize that. So that's a really good point, Jerry. It's always measure before cut. Was it measure twice then cut?
Measure twice, cut once, right? That's what we say in woodworking.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we just made the case for your Spectrum webinar, so I'm looking forward to that one. Getting an email on that one.
Yes, I think that would be pretty good.
I'm
folks,
working on it.
Probably put that in the chat there. Is that, would you like to see a more in-depth analysis on Spec An? I'm sure we could, and we can work on something.
That's awesome.
So talk to us about healthcare. And I know, Stu, you have a lot of experience in this too, because in Canada, healthcare is regulated by the government. And I personally have worked on some projects with you in a previous life for both of us in regards to healthcare. And so Jerry, we'll start with you and some of the work you've done on some government hospital facilities.
Yeah, so a lot of what we've done is guest Wi-Fi, right, for the service members and their family when they come in and they're getting treatments and whatnot. And we've found that for the most part, they're doing completely air-gapped networks. And air-gapped, that is kind of I don't know if it's a well-defined term, but basically what it means is that there is complete physical isolation of the two networks. So when we come in and do a proposal for something like this, we're putting racks or cabinets on the wall, locking cabinets. We're putting the racks in them, the power supplies, you know, the APCs or UPSs, whatever, switches. We're running cabling, and a lot of times it has to be a specific color, so we know that this is air gapped from the existing government network. Our own APs, again, anti-ligature stuff in certain departments, locking cabinets, other places, and it's just a completely separated network. In those cases, because it's not carrying government information, there have been times where we were able to do cloud-based management tools, right, from some of the larger OEMs out there. So, but yeah, again, the troubles there generally tend to be the RF spectrum, right? So we have to make sure we stay away from the government network and their Wi-Fi, because we can't interfere with a doctor not being able to pick up a phone and call somebody, or you know, a patient device, you know, not being able to connect to the nursing station and transmit critical information. So it tends to end up being a lot more APs with power turned down, strategically located. You know, and then those networks are more on the open side. They'll still have terms of service that you have to click through. In some cases, they wanted to offer like a Facebook login potentially, you know, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, a lot of times it tends to be air gap networks for them.
Stu, what about you?
Yeah, I think, you know, you brought up a point on the anti-ligature type of piece, and for those folks that aren't that sure of that term, is what it means is you know, having something that, you know, helping people not to harm themselves, right? And so when we work in facilities that, you know, you need a kind of a high touch environment, is that you need to strategically place access points where you may not want them to be, right? And so you are constrained. It says this is the only ceiling tile you have. Everything else is locked down. Make it work. And you're like, I can't. You know, it's like, okay, well, how can I make it work? Do I use a specific type of AP antenna that I can articulate in a wall, right? And there's some people that make that kind of cool stuff, right? And I've actually been able to do that, where I needed something flat on the wall, but I needed that AP to be articulated in the wall pointing down, but without having a patch on the outside. Now, you can imagine that. That's actually pretty slick, right? But making sure that using the right like, you know, when you say new government is, I mean, yes, all the hospitals here, majority are government, they're all government funded or public funded, right? So it's, you know, you're making sure that you're spending your dollars wisely. You're making sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck, and also that you're providing, it's like, hey, yes, Mr. Taxpayer, you're getting a good network, right? Whether you're coming in as patients, you're coming in, you know, whatnot, but you need to make sure that that environment is very good, but it does come with deployment complexities, and it comes in timing. When can you put them in? Do you need to shut down a room, right? You have to ask all those questions, because when you talked about earlier, you talked about we call it infection control, right? So you have to put a tape off an area, right? And and then get it in there. And asbestos, very common, very common. You will never get away from it, right? It's going to be, you know, probably another 20, 30 years maybe or more.
Yeah, and to your point, the network has to perform like it does everywhere else. I mean, if they walk into a hospital as a guest network, they're expecting that same coffee shop or even home Wi-Fi experience. That's what they want. They want it to work, you know, fast, free, frictionless, as our buddy says, and it's just got to work. So, you know, the challenge is working around that.
Well, especially you have doctors that need to run Vocera badges, right? And they need to be in those places, and or panic duress, right? So you need it everywhere. And it's not the doctor's job to make sure it knows where. It's up to our jobs to make sure that they can function, right? Perform anywhere that they can.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think most of us recognize this quite fun little building right here. So Jerry, share with us, you folks, one of the things that's really interesting for Stu and myself is we get to hear some of this stuff before we come onto the webinar. And so Jerry, talk to us about the Pentagon guest access.
Yeah. So not something I was involved in directly. Again, this is all public information, so anybody can find this and check on it. But it's funny because they actually didn't deploy wireless until I think it was late 2016 at the Pentagon. And again, it goes back to what we talked about before. Their guest access is not, you know, coffee shop type. You actually have to be sponsored guests. You have to be have a reason to be. I mean, you're not getting into the Pentagon just wandering around anyway, right? But for instance, like
there goes my lunch hour.
I would sure hope not.
No, exactly, right. Yeah. So I mean, they do have public tours, and you can come on as a guest. You can walk the building as a guest of somebody. But you know, again, if you don't have legitimate business to be there, you're generally not getting on that network. But so it's relatively new, and just in general, right? So like I think I read it was in a trade magazine, very well published IT trade magazine back in either 2013 or 14 that had the titles, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but it's something like, if you like Wi-Fi at work, don't work for the government, right? Because they were just lagging behind, and there was a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about, you know, wireless networks. You know, all the packets are flying through the air, anybody can hear and capture them, and that kind of stuff, right? So a lot of the bigger name agencies have taken a little longer than others to get there. But I mean, you know, there is Wi-Fi at the Pentagon, and a lot of times we'll have conversations with some of the smaller civilian agencies that have concerns about Wi-Fi in their space. And we explain to them, Pentagon has it, National Security Agency has it. They actually have a program called CSFC, which is the Commercial Solutions for Classified, where they actually take commercial off-the-shelf stuff, the same stuff you and I buy for all of our other customers, and they implement it in a certain way to make it where it can actually carry classified information across the air. All right, you know, we're trying to shoot down a lot of that stuff. So it can be done. There's just, you know, certain ways and controls and certain ways to go about it, but it can be done.
Yeah. Awesome. Stu, what other government projects have you been a part of that you want to share with?
That I can share. Oh, goodness. But definitely on the healthcare side, definitely a little bit maybe about some other kind of government buildings. Can't say which ones, but more of the ones that are kind of in between government. Like, so there's you have your government buildings that are kind of we call them like parliamentary and outside. So it's kind of the middle part of the building that is how are you going to say it? It's not quite like how to put it into the terms of okay. So let's say for instance the Senate, that is kind of its own structure, right? It's not part of the other side of the government. It's kind of a neutral entity. So working in buildings such as that, working in a neutral entity type piece, which is not influenced by other major government departments, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Right.
So those are actually quite complex too, because their requirements are very different, right? Then because they also have to do some public pieces as well. But
Mhm.
very I think that there are commonalities with a lot of the deployments that I've done over the years, and then there's a lot of things that are, it depends, and it's just like, well, that's different, you know.
Mhm.
Even working in a mine
Mm-hmm.
kilometer down below the surface, right? It's,
Yeah.
you think that working at the center of the earth, it's like, oh, okay, it should be cool, right? But it's very different metrics,
Mhm.
very different requirements, right?
Yeah.
And this security top of mind, different, right? Or
So
can I make it super loud? Do I have to be do I have to
Yeah.
fall under guidelines, right?
Yeah.
So talking about security, someone was asking the question, for sponsored guest networks, do you typically do .1x or are you using PBSK?
.1x is the order of the day for the most part in the government, you know, and the commercial systems they're using is like the ClearPass and ICE type solutions, right? That's basically what they're doing. There is no like WPA2 type stuff, because rekeying networks is just completely impossible with the government. So everything is you know, enterprise
I can
level,
imagine.
security type
Yeah.
stuff. So using a radius, some sort of radius authentication.
Mhm.
And you know, talking about like some of the major OEMs, you know, ClearPass and ICE have the ability to do that kind of stuff. So that's what they're using.
Mhm. Gotcha.
Yep.
And I
So-
think that we had, we did cover that, multiple platforms in the same building. That was a
Yes.
question that we had in the
Yes.
Q&A, and I just wanted to just cover that off.
Yeah.
That was good.
The other thing around security,
And,
I'll add though, is that you know, wireless intrusion prevention and detection is another key thing, especially on the
Mhm.
classified networks for wireless, where it's
Mhm.
actually the governance states that they have to have like location scanning and location sensing capabilities on those
Mhm.
networks. Interesting story. So I went out to a naval facility where we were doing a tabletop show, and it was just, you know, just IT based tabletop show. And in the instructions to get on board, you have to give all your PII so they can make sure that you're not foreign national and whatnot. And they tell you leave your cell phone in the car and, you know, whatever. So we go into the building and we're gathered in the front entryway, and they have to escort us down the hallway into the cafeteria area where this
Mhm.
thing was going on. And then we get about halfway down the hallway and we're stopped by 2 military personnel, and they ask, who has a cell phone? And we all look at each other as like, I know I don't have mine. They knew that somebody in that group forgot to leave their cell phone in the car, and the guy rustled through his bag. He says, oop, that's me. They escort him back to the front of the building. It just nothing bad, right? They just had to go back out. But I mean,
Nice.
the WIDs and WIPs that they have implemented and the way they do it, it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
I can imagine. I'm sure there's a lot of that you're going to run into, and especially in environments that have skiffs and some of those other facilities.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a requirement mandate for
It's
that.
funny that word skiff. I just get hung up on that because I envision the a transport thing from Return of the Jedi over Jabba's palace. You know, that skiff that Han Solo and
Different kind of
Chewie
skiff.
were on. Yeah, different
Yeah.
kind of skiff. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Way different kind. Way,
Yeah.
Yeah.
way
Star Wars
different.
got to have a Star Wars reference or Star Trek reference at
There we go.
in our calls. Yep.
I'm okay with that.
Excellent.
Oh, Stu, you make me laugh.
Well, what I can say, folks, is that, I mean, you know, my experience, the deployment side of things it's very complex, and be aware that you know, you're going to probably find something new, and has everyone been there and done that? Maybe not necessarily.
Yeah, no,
But,
that I will second that. I mean, every installation that we've done, we've always found some little thing that's different that we've documented, you know, to add to our internal documentation about what we've found and what we've seen.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's for sure. Everyone is different in its own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, so we're getting close to time, but you know, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talk about, so lots and lots of red tape. Jerry, talk to us about just some final thoughts about Governor General and some of the deployments, you know, some of the final thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's clear that, you know, you have to understand the network requirements and have deep conversations with the customers and try to really figure out what they're trying to do.
Mhm.
And I've tried in the past to create like a list of questions that we ask,
Mhm.
but again, because of the diverse nature of these networks, there's no one template you can use, right? Especially when you switch from a civilian agency to a Department of Defense agencies, it's just very different. So understanding the network, what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish to help architect the right solution for them is what you have to do to be successful in this in this business. And then, a high level of security involved around specifically any not just the secured, the classified networks, but any government network that's carrying government information. For instance, like, I don't want unsecure Wi-Fi at Social Security Administration where my Social Security number could be flying around, right? So security is top of mind. Every document that you read, and like I said, you can Google most of this stuff. It's readily available. Everything is predicated on security. The reason why this document exists is to secure the information, right? And then know the design challenges really about, these buildings that we talked about earlier, right? Is this new office space really a new building? Is it an office complex, or are you repurposing a bunker for something, right? And sometimes when if you're just responding to an RFP and you're not physically out there and you don't know that, you can get burned pretty quickly. So it's really important to understand the environment, the physical environment, the RF environment. Is there a group of folks right down the hall that are doing RF, some crazy things with RF as they're testing new equipment, right? So yeah, a lot of interesting challenges.
I did have just one random question. How difficult is it to go about getting the security clearances that you need for each type?
You mean as an individual or for the network? Well,
individual to be able to work on some of these facilities.
Yeah. So in order to have a clearance from secret level all the way up, it's a long process. It can take anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years. You have to work.
Government has a long process.
Shocker, right? And you have to have a need for it. They don't just hand them out randomly. Like, excuse me, like our company has a facilities clearance, but they don't just give everybody a clearance whoever needs it. You have to be on a job, on a particular opportunity that requires it. They call them billets on the DoD side, right? So you have to have a reason to have it. Then they go through the process, and depending on whether it's secret, top secret, if there's SCIs or TSSCI, all the different levels that you can add on top of that can make that whole process more complex. So. It really depends. Again, 6 months to several years for that process to happen.
Gotcha. Stu, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that there's knowing the environment. I think Jerry, you probably would agree as well. Is when you walk into these complex infrastructures, and you see things right away that's like that don't make sense. That just like that's wrong. Why are they doing that? I think probably one of the best questions to ask is the why. Understand why they're doing it first.
Yeah.
So you don't kind of berate them and say, well, you're doing it wrong. Well, obviously I see it's in the wrong place. Right? Understand why it's there, and then offer a solution to kind of an alternate look at it. I think one of those are the hard things to do is, in government and in those type of organizations, they do things for a reason, maybe the why, but understand that why first and then give them the professional opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just don't want to walk in. I think that kind of applies to any type of environment in really these days, right? Because you don't know how that site survey was done before, right?
It's absolutely true. And we've actually encountered situations where, a request for proposal is sent out and it includes a site survey that was done by some other smaller company or just another company, doesn't matter what size they are. And we have lots of questions like, why was this done this way? Why didn't they cover this area? And how come we didn't get this bit of information out of it and whatnot? So yeah, it's really important to understand the entire picture before you start throwing numbers together on an Excel spreadsheet, trying to turn a quote out, right?
Yeah, there were a few questions that have come in at the end here really quick. So before we end, so Jerry, any techniques specifically to use to encrypt wired data on government networks? Have you done any work on that side at all?
A little bit, and it's basically, the government will, for the most part, use PKI keys. Like most government networks, to get on the network, you need a CAC, right, a common access card. So that they have special keyboards that have a card that you plug into, and it's got your PKI key on there to validate you and verify who you are. That's the most common use across the government for securing the wired side of the network. 802.1x for ports. A lot of them don't leave ports open. Like you can't walk into a conference room or an office space in the government and just plug into a random open port and find something. A lot of times they will turn those off.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Well, once again, Jerry, thank you so much for joining us today. Government is public sector is one of those that just really is just difficult because it
Yeah,
literally
it's
could be
different.
anything and everything. So we appreciate you talking to us today. And folks,
Happy
I
to be
know
here.
that Jerry is more than happy to answer questions. Like I know
Absolutely.
somebody had a question about maybe not necessarily disability, but a veteran and what the opportunity to get involved with work as a veteran in
Yeah.
government projects. So Jerry would be more than happy. I'm voluntelling him
There you go.
to reach out to him on Twitter. We've had a couple folks asking questions about how to deploy a new network. So we do weekly live demos that Stu and the team lead. So make sure you click on that link. The information is right here on the right-hand side of the screen, talking about the demo and where you can get additional information, where you can get additional support. We've had a lot of talks about, or conversation, excuse me, surrounding ECSE. That's another one that also you can find more information about that online. But Jerry, seriously, thanks again.
Happy to be here.
Fantastic to hear about the different projects, because it's such a beast, man.
It is. I hope this was helpful. And like you said, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help you guys out. And the government sector is such a large space. There's plenty of room for everybody to play. So, lots of room, and happy to help wherever I can. You guys have been gracious hosts, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share.
Oh, Jerry.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being on. I mean, this is great. I mean,
you
lot
taking
today.
the time.
Excellent.
And that's another thing, folks. If you have a webinar topic, I know we talked about specifically looking at Spectrum Analyzer and reading, that. If you have ideas for webinars, please submit them to us. We'd be more than happy to work that into our schedule. We want to make sure that
we'd love to hear from you. What do you think? We had a couple of good ideas actually in the chat here, which was I want to know, maybe do some in-depth spectrum analysis webinar, right?
Yeah, reporting as well.
Reporting, yeah, that's
yes.
I think we could.
I can tell you that is on the calendar coming.
Nice.
Oh, you spilled the beans, didn't you?
Shh, don't tell anybody.
Tanya is not going to get a security clearance.
I know. Oh, let's be honest, that's not happening.
Okay.
All right, folks. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, sorry, yes, Stu. I totally just cut you off.
I was just going to say, I think I would, as we just off to end of the recording, I wanted to say hi, I'm Stu. I'm your sidekick, joined by my host, Tawny, and of course, Jerry, and behind the scenes, Abhishek, manning the chat and Q&A as a support. So thank you very much, folks, for joining us today. And we will cut out the recording.
Thanks.
All right.
Yep.